Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to show you the family tree of Byzantine emperors, aka the Eastern Roman emperors, from Irene of Athens to Constantine the 11th. In other words, I'll finally be continuing on from where I left off in my Roman Emperors Part 2 video. The reason it took me so long to make this one is because I was waiting until I had the chance to redesign my European royal family tree north/east chart. Now that that's done, these three charts all match and work nicely together. As you can see, the Roman emperor's family tree poster ends with Charlemagne, who was crowned emperor in the West in the year 800, as well as Irene of Athens, who in that same year was serving as emperor in the East. Well, the bottom two charts continue the story from there. The West one starts with Charlemagne and includes all of the Holy Roman Emperors and other Western European monarchs, whereas the North/East chart starts with Irene of Athens and includes the rest of the Byzantine emperors, as well as all the other Eastern European and Scandinavian monarchs. If you want to get a copy of any of these posters, you can do so right now by going to usefulcharts.com or by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. Irene started out as an empress consort, meaning that she was simply the wife of an emperor, in this case, Leo IV. However, when Leo IV died unexpectedly of fever at age 30, their son Constantine VI suddenly became emperor at age 9. This meant that he needed a regent, i.e., someone to rule on his behalf until he became an adult. That person ended up being his mother. And thus, in 780, Irene went from being empress consort to being empress regent. As empress regent, her most important contribution was the ending of iconoclasm, which meant that people could once again create and venerate images of Jesus. When Constantine VI reached the age of 19, he tried to wrest control away from his mother and rule on his own. But in the end, he was unsuccessful. So much so that in 792, Irene managed to get herself named as co-emperor. But from there, Constantine's popularity went downhill, and within 5 years, Irene was able to depose him, have him blinded, and make herself the sole remaining Roman emperor, becoming the first ever female to hold that position. And this is where things got interesting for a while, because her reign coincided with the crowning of Charlemagne as emperor in the West, in part because the Pope refused to recognize Irene as the legitimate emperor in the East. There was even some discussion about having Charlemagne and Irene marry, which would have created a united empire that looked like this. But that never happened because in 802, her minister of finance successfully deposed her, becoming Emperor Nikephorus I. By this point, the Byzantines had two main enemies, the Abbasids to the east and the Bulgarians to the north. The Abbasids were experiencing their golden age at this time, under the leadership of their most famous caliph, Harun ar-Rashid. He launched a major invasion into Byzantine territory, with an army so large that Nikephorus decided to pay tribute rather than fight. However, he thought he could defeat the Bulgarians, but he was wrong. In 811, he died in battle against them, after which the Bulgarian leader Krum famously had Nikephorus' skull made into a drinking cup. His son Storakios was wounded in the same battle, but initially survived, enabling him to become the next emperor. However, he never did fully recover and ended up dying 68 days later. At this point, the throne passed to his brother-in-law, Michael I. He reigned for only 2 years because things were very unstable at this point, and he sensed that two of his most popular generals, the future emperors Leo V and Michael II, were plotting against him. So instead of allowing that plot to come to fruition, he opted to retire and become a monk. Not a bad move in my opinion, because he ended up living for another 31 years. unlike Leo V, who lived only 7 more years, because he ended up being assassinated by his former ally Michael, who then became Michael II. In order to strengthen his position, Michael II married the daughter of Constantine VI, thus connecting him to a previous dynasty. They did not have any children though, so when Michael II became the first emperor in a long time to die at a relatively old age, his son Theophilus, from a previous marriage, succeeded him. But then history repeated itself. Like Leo IV, Theophilus died unexpectedly from disease, leaving a child who was too young to rule. Thus, like Irene of Athens, Theodora ended up serving as empress regent, although it is sometimes argued that she was actually an empress regnant. Also like Irene, she put a stop to iconoclasm, which had been reinstated by Leo V. However, Theodora differed from Irene in that she was not able to hold on to power after Michael III became of age. Now, the exact relationship between Michael III and the next 2 emperors is unclear. First of all, there's the possibility that Michael and Basil, who started out as his close friend and chamberlain, might have been lovers. There's also the fact that Michael III was also lovers with Basil's wife, having started an affair with her long before she married Basil, which means that the paternity of Leo VI is in doubt, with Michael III actually being the more likely candidate, even though officially Basil was the father. Either way, it doesn't really matter because eventually Michael made Basil his co-emperor, and then Basil eventually became sole emperor after he assassinated Michael, and then finally when he himself died, Leo VI became emperor in the end. Now, if that's not good material for a soap opera, I don't know what is. But before I keep going, I need to back up and tell you a bit more about Basil I. He's important because he was the first emperor since Justinian the Great to completely revise the empire's law code. You see, even though about 350 years had passed, the Byzantines were still using Justinian's law code, which had been written in Latin, even though the Eastern Empire was now fully Greek. Thus, Basil I instructed everything to be updated and rewritten in Greek. The new law code, finished by Leo VI and known as the Basilica, was used in Greece up until the 20th century. Now, at this point, I need to explain the term born in the purple, because it was around this time that it started to be used. Basically, a child was born in the purple if they were born after their father became the emperor. You see, purple was a very expensive color to make in those days, and the Byzantine palace had a completely purple room where the empress would give birth. So, for example, Leo VI was not born in the purple because he was born before Basil I became emperor, when Michael III was still alive, which is why his paternity is unclear. In contrast, Alexander was born in the purple because he was born after Michael III died and when Basil I was emperor. Because of this, Basil I wanted Alexander to be his heir, and future generations also favored sons born in the purple over older sons who were born previously. However, in this case, Leo VI, who was very bookish and intellectual, was so popular that he ended up becoming emperor first. In addition to finishing the new law code, he also started a book about economics and one that explained who was who in the Byzantine court. Because of these achievements, he became known as Leo the Wise and was revered as a sort of Solomon-like figure by future generations. His reign set the tone for the next 2 centuries, which historians refer to as the Macedonian Renaissance, named after Basil I, who was from Macedonia. You see, ever since the Muslim conquests back in the 600s, the Byzantine Empire had been in decline. But things reversed with the Macedonian Dynasty, because they managed to revive things like literature and architecture, making Constantinople once again a great city for culture and learning. Another example of Leo VI's wisdom is how he dealt with the Kievan Rus, who attacked Constantinople in 907. Rather than battle them, Louis engaged in diplomacy, offering them lucrative trade rights, which helped better connect Constantinople to Kiev and beyond. It was also around this time that the Varangian Guard was established. They started out as Vikings from Kievan Rus, but ended up as elite soldiers tasked with protecting the Byzantine emperor. When Leo VI died, his only son Constantine was just 6 years old, and thus Leo's brother Alexander became emperor instead. But Alexander was not so wise, and he provoked a war with Bulgaria before dying after just 1 year, probably from eating and drinking too much. This left young Constantine VII and his regent, the Patriarch of Constantinople, in a tough position because Simeon I of Bulgaria was now riding a wave of victories and had his sights on taking the emperorship for himself. In order to avoid this, the Patriarch instead bestowed upon Simeon the title of Emperor of the Bulgarians, meaning that for the first time ever, there were now 2 different types of Eastern emperors. This did not go over well with the citizens of Constantinople, and thus the Patriarch was fired as regent and replaced by Constantine's mother. But she wasn't popular either, and was eventually replaced by an admiral named Romanos, who named himself co-emperor and married his daughter Helena to the young Constantine. Romanos reigned for 24 years, which allowed Constantine VII to spend more time on intellectual pursuits instead, such as creating books about agriculture, court ceremonies, and history. However, when Romano I's sons deposed their father in 944 in the hopes of becoming emperors themselves, the people made it clear that they wanted Constantine to finally reign on his own. And so he did, becoming the ultimate scholar emperor of the period. Constantine VII was followed by his son Romanos II, but when he died young, he was replaced by a general named Nikephorian II, who his widow Theophano quickly married. During the reign of Nikephorian, the dynasty's successes shifted from intellectual gains to military gains. He was able to reconquer Crete and Cyprus, but then was assassinated by his nephew John I, who had been brother-in-law to Romanos II, but was now having an affair with Theophano. At this point, John became emperor and continued the military expansion, reconquering Thrace and Syria, and even coming within 100 kilometers of taking back Jerusalem. But then, when he died of natural causes, Romanos II's son Basil II finally came to the throne and ended up becoming the greatest of the Macedonian emperors. He made peace with the Kievan Rus by arranging a marriage between Vladimir the Great and his sister Anna. This led to the Christianization of Kievan Rus from Constantinople, and is the reason why Ukraine and Russia today follow Orthodox Christianity rather than Roman Catholicism like Poland and Lithuania do, who adopted Christianity from the West. It is also primarily because of this marriage that a little bit of Byzantine blood eventually spread to just about every royal family in Europe, a topic that I plan to return to at a later date. Anyhow, Basil II also continued the Byzantine Empire's expansion in the east, but most of all he's remembered for finally conquering the Bulgarians, who had been a major foe now for over 300 years. In the end, Basil II reigned just 1 month shy of 50 years, becoming the longest reigning Roman emperor of all time. However, he died childless and was thus succeeded by his brother Constantine VIII. But Constantine VIII was already old by this point and didn't have any sons. And thus, on his deathbed, he arranged for his daughter Zoe to marry the leader of the Senate, who became Romanos III. But Zoe did not love Romanos III. She instead fell in love with a man named Michael, and eventually the two arranged to have Romanos killed, whereupon Michael and Zoe got married, and Michael IV became the new emperor. But Michael IV ended up having several health problems, including epilepsy, and therefore he convinced Zoe to adopt his son, Michael V, from a previous marriage, so that he would have an heir. Things went according to plan, and when Michael IV died, Michael V did become emperor. However, when he banished Zoe and her sister Theodora, both of whom were far more popular with the people than he was, a mob broke into the palace and demanded that Michael V be replaced with Zoe and Theodora. Thus, in the year 1042, the Byzantine Empire found itself in a very unusual position, in which they had not just one, but two reigning empresses. However, this situation lasted for only 52 days, because when Zoe married for a third time to Constantine IX, he became the primary emperor. It was during his tenure that one of the most important events in the history of the Christian Church occurred, the Great Schism of 1054, in which the Western Church, led by the Pope in Rome, and the Eastern Church, led by the Patriarch of Constantinople, formally split, becoming the Latin-based Roman Catholic Church and the Greek-based Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, Constantine IX is also notable in that his last name was Monomachos. This is important because one of his daughters from a previous marriage married Svesvolod I of Kievan Rus. Together, they had Vladimir II, who was also known as Vladimir Monomach. Legend has it that Constantine IX presented his grandson with this crown, known as Monomach's cap, although most parts of the current crown were added in the 1300s. You can see on this chart that later Russian rulers would often wear Monomach's cap in their portraits. They did this in order to promote their legitimacy as the Third Rome, a concept I'll come back to near the end of this video. Anyhow, after the reign of Constantine IX, the Byzantine Empire once again began to decline. He was followed by three rulers, all with very short reigns. First, Empress Theodora again, reigning this time on her own. Next, an aging bureaucrat named Michael VI. And then finally, a general named Isaac I. After him came Constantine X, during whose reign the Normans captured southern Italy. Next, after his death, his widow married a new husband, who became Romanos IV. And it was he who suffered the worst Byzantine defeat of all time. You see, Romanos IV lost the Battle of Manzikert to the Seljuk Turks, being captured and humiliated in the process. At this point, Constantine X's son Michael VII became emperor, and within the next few years, the Turks conquered most of Asia Minor, which is today known as Turkey. So basically, by this point, the Byzantine Empire was not really much of an empire, having shrunk considerably from its glory days. Continuing on, Michael VII married Maria of Alania, who was a Georgian princess. But when he was deposed for, losing Asia Minor and for allowing the Byzantine currency to devalue, Maria did that thing whereby she married the new emperor, Nikephorian III, in order to give him legitimacy. But, like we've seen before, she secretly had another lover. This time, it was Alexios, the nephew of former Emperor Isaac I. You can probably guess what happened next. Yep, Maria and Alexios arranged for Nikephorian III to be deposed, so that Alexios could become the new emperor. Now, like I say, the empire was definitely in decline again by this point. But Alexios I managed to get things back on track for a while. For one thing, he was the guy who initiated the First Crusade. First, he repaired Constantinople's relationship with the Pope, and then he convinced the Pope to call on all of the Christian princes in Western Europe to come to his aid in fighting back against the Muslims. His plan worked in that it put the Muslim armies on the defensive for the next 200 years. But the Crusaders did not give the lands they reconquered back to the Byzantine Empire. Instead, they set up several new mini-states, the most important of which was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Alexios I was followed by his son John II, who is known as John the Good, because basically he was able to restore the empire's reputation as a great power, something that it had lost after the Battle of Manzikert. He was then followed by his son Manuel I, during whose reign the empire continued to flourish, and during whose reign we got the Second Crusade, although it wasn't as successful as the first. Together, these three Komnenos emperors reigned for 100 years, with very smooth transitions in between. But after the death of Manuel I, things got bumpy once again, starting with Manuel's son, Alexios II, who was deposed at age 14 and then killed by his cousin Andronicus I. But then he in turn was deposed and killed, very brutally I might add, by another cousin, Isaac II. During the reign of Isaac II, the Third Crusade occurred, the one involving the great Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, the famous King of England Richard the Lionheart, and the powerful King of France Philip II. But once that was over, things really started to go downhill fast for the Byzantines. It started when Isaac II's brother Alexios III usurped the throne and sent Isaac and his son Alexios IV into exile. But while in exile, Alexios IV managed to send a message to the Latin Crusaders asking for help. This launched the Fourth Crusade, which took place in Constantinople itself. The Crusaders managed to overthrow Alexios III, restoring Isaac II and Alexios IV back to the throne. But when they were unable to pay the Crusaders for their help, things got ugly. Alexios III's son-in-law, Alexios V, tried to take advantage of the situation, but in the end, the Latin Crusaders got rid of the Byzantine rulers altogether and decided to rule Constantinople on their own, placing the Count of Flanders, Baldwin IX, on the throne as Emperor Baldwin I. Thus, for the next 57 years, the Byzantine Empire ceased to exist and was instead replaced with what historians call the Latin Empire. Now, during this period, what had been the Byzantine Empire actually broke up into a bunch of smaller states, and one of these, called the Empire of Trebizond, was ruled by the descendants of Andronicus I, which brings up an interesting pattern that was noticed at the time. In Greek, the name John is spelled with an I, and therefore the initials of these four emperors spell out A-I-M-A, or Hema, which means blood. If we then take the initials of the next two emperors and then continue with Andronicus I's son Manuel and the first Trapezuntine emperor, assuming that these two guys were illegitimate, we once again get A-I-M-A, Hema. But it doesn't end there. The next four Trapezuntine emperors spell out for a third time A-I-M-A. But then we get a George, who ruins the pattern. George, how could you? But back to the Byzantine Empire, because it did not actually end with the Fourth Crusade. A great-grandson of Alexios III, named Michael Palaiologos, who had inherited another one of the rump states called the Empire of Nicaea, managed to reconquer Constantinople and restore the empire, becoming Michael VIII. His dynasty, the Palaiologos, would end up being the final dynasty of the Eastern Roman Empire. Michael VIII was followed by his son, Andronicus II, who married a Hungarian princess. He had a long reign, but near the end had to fight a civil war against his grandson, Andronicus III, which ended with the older Andronicus abdicating. Andronicus III was then followed by his son, John V, who was only 9. This led to a second civil war, in which a general named John VI ended up taking power for 7 years. But then, once John V reached 20 years of age, there was yet another civil war, which resulted in John V winning back the throne. But all the infighting didn't stop there. Several decades later, John V had to fight against his own son, Andronicus IV, who allied with the Ottoman prince Savki Bey, who was trying to overthrow his father. Andronicus IV was partially successful, managing to steal the throne for a few years. But eventually John V won it back. But then John V had to fight for his throne one last time, when near the end of his life, his grandson, John VII, tried to take power. He managed to rule for 5 months, but was then deposed with the help of Manuel II, who succeeded his father the next year. So what was the result of all these civil wars? Well, it severely weakened and shrunk the Byzantine Empire, which was not good because the Ottomans, who had replaced the Seljuks as the main Muslim power to the east, were getting stronger and stronger. We're now down to the final three Byzantine emperors. During the reign of Manuel II, the Ottomans tried to take Constantinople 4 times. They were unsuccessful in taking the city, but by this point they basically controlled all of the land around it, the Byzantine Empire being reduced mostly to this small strip of land here. Manuel II was followed by his son John VIII, who continued to hold off the Ottomans and who helped set up the Council of Florence, which was the best attempt ever made at a reunification between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. That didn't happen though, and the stage was thus set for the final demise of the Byzantine Empire. When John VIII died, he was succeeded by his brother Constantine XI, and 4 years into his reign in 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror was finally able to capture Constantinople, bringing a permanent end to the Byzantine Empire, which had lasted 1,123 years. It was also the formal end of the Roman Empire, which had lasted 1,480 years. It is difficult to overstate the importance of the year 1453 in world history. Many historians use it as a dividing line between the medieval period and the modern period, and it can be argued that the loss of the Byzantine Empire's trade routes to the east is what helped spur on the Age of Discovery, in which Western European powers took to the seas and eventually started colonizing the globe. Now, I should mention that Constantine XI died the day Constantinople fell, although there is no record of exactly how. He did, however, have one surviving brother named Thomas, who had a daughter named Zoe, later known as Sophia, who married Ivan the Great of Moscow. She was the grandmother of Ivan the Terrible, the very first Tsar of Russia, which is one of the reasons why Russia claimed to be the Third Rome. Another reason being that they were now the most powerful remaining European power that followed Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Okay, so that concludes our look at the family tree of every Roman emperor, from Caesar Augustus in part 1 to Constantine the 11th Palaiologos in this video. In a few weeks' time, I will consolidate all 3 parts in this series into a single video. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching.